Gord's Poetry Show! Gonna tell you about things that's going around. Ain't nobody man gonna run us down. Don't move your head, don't move your head, don't move your lips, just shake your head. Well, 1972. It's only just around the corner, and how can any of us forget? Even those of you who are only 12 or 17 probably know it. A little exile. This August, this Sunday afternoon in August, welcome to Gord's Poetry Show. Is it number 8 or number 9? Ugh, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Oh, it's sad to be losing one's marbles at this early stage of the game. But such is the fate of aging. Welcome, welcome, welcome. First of all, George Bowering, well-known senior, not too senior, Canadian poet, former poet laureate. We've been looking into his volume Blondes on Bikes. That's the one with the Greg Carnot painting of the bicycle on the cover. Almost iconic painting of the bicycle. Let's continue with his poem Overripe Grain. I'm not too fond these days of the magic hand of chance. I feel my brain slip sideways, slip forward, as if it seeks to elude the magic grip of chance. When still taller than my pile of books, I oogled chance. I kissed the air and sent it wafting to the face of fate, who knew me not, whose stars were not shining when I came home. My shoulder waits with irksome fear the magic finger of chance, and I don't want to know about it. I'll take half, I say, half the odds, the magic dodge of chance. Poems about England, in which the poet expresses his own opinions. How can poems about England make me homesick, make me hold the book against my face and give halfway to tears? Or something like that. I've been in England a few times, felt strange at home there, stood 6 feet over my DNA in Berkshire. English paintings don't do it. Movies are familiar and foreign, need subtitles. English novels are historical, about classes, and generally dull as ditchwater. But poems about England and walking in England make me homesick, make me feel at home and sad as hell. My other half is from hills in the US South. When I see people from there in their faded, dusty suspenders, I feel lonely as an English poem. Brian Culhane, American poet. His book, The King's Question. And Mr. Culhane is the winner of the Emily Dickinson First Book Award, I might add. And reading this book, I can see why. It's a powerful contribution to the American poetic art. And deep and philosophical and referential is his work. Here's a rather full to the brim utterance. At Wallace Stevens' grave, whenever people gesture and their gestures melt in air, lightly, for split seconds, then recur in the mind the way fragments of a jar in Paris revert to wholeness on their way back up to the ledge or table fallen from, to be shown in flaky black and white, down and up, reassembling and breaking apart on worn flagstones, up and down again and again, for the wonderment of those watching the flicker of the first projector, and sucking in their breath and letting out their breath. Our modern frieze of the life we have descended from in one unbroken line, begun with those luminaries now facing us on stamps, white-suited and bow-tied in chill repose, their brows thickened in thought, their hands stilled from invention, their angular jaws clenched against the photographer's lens. Whenever I have stopped to consider the allurement proffered by some diver poised on the sudden brink, then in cleaving flight, piercing the grey pool water, whose froth slowly erupts and then fountains slowly back into the pool, only to just as slowly reverse course and stream down feet, legs, trunk with the now drying black suit, as the anonymous body arcs up and jackknifes back onto the springing board that slowly settles to rest as he backwards steps off. Whenever, I say, I have stopped halfway myself between stepping off a corner into traffic or halfway through revolving doors in some airport terminus, whenever I have thought of you, I have thought of those lines of lilting abstractions ascending and descending through a mind of winter. Yours in all its jar and diver, stillness and eruption and recovery. And think, too, of summer and the Gulf, and those long executive weeks watching waves curl repeatedly on the hidden sandbar, flecking foam soundlessly offshore, while the vast stanzas of some unwritten poem begin to assemble and dissolve in vistas of intellect. And it is this image I see whenever I hear in my ear one of your poems, uncoiling its length or tolling its syllables one after the next, down the page and up the next, until I can fathom any expression of remorse or love. Peter Quince, nor any landscape or gesture or rhythm that does not have as its echo one of yours, early or late. And thus when I picture, always without colour or sound, the hedgerows and tamped gravel walks, the isolate figures with or without lilies, the gravestones unadorned or adorned by trumpet or angel, or, in Roman style, open scroll with one student attending at the side of the seated bearded magus. I see in my mind's eye the jar even such an age as ours surrounds, much as hand surrounds lily or pool water diver. And just this I know is true and false, one and the same, that your poems are a bat of lathes and struts eager to take to air, and you an old philosopher in the Rome of the mind. rigging ideas to astonish clouds, though we sit like the thinker in Picasso's Fall of Icarus, perplexed, hand clasping hand, watching the downward sloping path of the one sailing through blue. If nothing can save us from this gravity, if nothing keeps us from looking upward and looking downward with longing, then we may find solace in art, which, like the vision of rises from death. Thank you, Brian. Lately, we've been looking at the selected poems of the Scottish poet Kathleen Jamie and her book Waterlight, and I have returned quite delightedly to its lyrics today. Excuse me. Some garden poems, or so it would seem. The Budlia. When I pause to consider a God or creation unfolding in front of my eyes, is this my lot? Always brought back to the same grove of statues in ill-fitting clothes. My suddenly elderly parents, their broken-down Hoover, or my quarreling kids. Come evening, it's almost too late to walk in the garden and try once again to retire the masculine god of my youth by evoking instead the divine in the lupins or foxgloves or self-seeded Budlia, whose heavy horns flush as they open to flower and draw these bumbling, well-meaning bees, which remind me again of my father, whom, Christ, I've forgotten to call. Rhododendrons, what a surprise. It wasn't sand martins hunting insects in the updraft, or the sudden scent of bog myrtle that made me pause, lean across the parapet, but a handful of purple baubles reflected below the water's surface, as comfortable and motionless as a family in their living room watching TV. What was it, I'd have asked, to exist so bright and fateless, while time coursed through our every atom over its bed of stones? But darkness was weighing the flowers and birds' backs, and already my friends had moved on. It would seem from the following poem, Suitcases, that Kathleen Jamie has visited Canada. Sorry I missed you, Kathleen. Piled high in a corner of a second-hand store in Toronto. Of course, it's an immigrant country. Sometimes all you can take is what you can carry when you run. A photo, some clothes, and the useless dead weight of your mother tongue. One was repaired with electrician's tape. A trade was all a man needed. A girl, well, a girl could get married. Indeed, each case opened like an invitation. The shell-pink lining, the knicker-like pockets you hook back with a finger to look for the little linked keys. I remember how each held a wraith of stale air, and how the assistant seemed taken aback by my accent. By then, though, I was headed for home, bored and already pregnant. Canadian poet Anne Szumigalski, hope I said that right, has passed some years now. and an edited, selected by Mark Abley of her work of prose and poetry has been published. It's called A Woman Clothed in Words. And I would like to read a little from an essay on poetics, which is itself remarkably poetic. It's called The Poetics of Tension and Encounter, and this little segment is called Our Sullen Art. And I think we know what that refers to. Our sullen art. The language of poetry has something to do with the open mouth, the tongue that jumps up and down like a child on a shed roof, calling, "Ha ha, and who's the dirty rascal now?" The same boy sent to his room for punishment leans from his window, listening for animals, far away in the woods, strains his ears to catch even the slightest sound of rage, but nothing howls, even the hoot of owls in the dusk is gentle. He hears the tiny snarl of the shrew, the rasp of the snail's foot on the leaf, the too-high squeaking of bats, which comes to his head as the vibration of distant hacksaws. He hums, with his lips tight shut. He stands there, listening and humming almost through the short night, then falls into the tangle of sheets and blankets where fitfully he sleeps, while slowly the window grays to 4 panes of bleak light. The first day's traffic travels carefully past the windows and doors of the shut house, so as not to awaken in the child those savage cries, our violent, our pathetic language of poems. And of course, what else after that but the great Dylan Thomas, In My Craft or Sullen Art. In my craft or sullen art, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages and the lovers lie abed with all their griefs in their arms, I labour by singing light, not for ambition or bread, or the strut and trade of charms on ivory stages, but for those common wages of their most secret heart. Not for the proud man apart from the raging moon I write on these spindrift pages, nor for the towering dead with their nightingales and psalms, but for the lovers, their arms round the griefs of the ages, who pay no praise or wages, nor heed my craft or art. A poet, an acquaintance of mine on Facebook, Zach Wells, made a reference to the writing of Annie Dillard. And I thought, haven't read Annie Dillard in a while. So I picked up an old book of essays of hers, Teaching a Stone to Talk. Read some of that quite delightedly. And then, as happenstance would have it, looking at Dylan Thomas's collected poems today, I came across the poem, the early poem, the not much read poem, Shall Gods Be Said to Thump the Clouds? Shall gods be said to thump the clouds when clouds are cursed by thunder? Be said to weep when weather howls? Shall rainbows be their tunic's colour? When it is rain, where are the gods? Shall it be said they sprinkle water from garden cans or free the floods? Shall it be said that Venus-wise an old god's dugs are pressed and pricked? The wet night scolds me like a nurse. It shall be said that gods are stone, Shall a dropped stone drum on the ground, flung gravel chime? Let the stones speak with tongues that talk, all tongues. We've been dipping into David McFadden's most recent book, What's the Score? Released only this year. And let us dip farther into number 30, Ghosts. One's knees stop shaking about the time childhood friends are retiring from their carefree and sensible careers. While you learn to talk like a chorus girl and even to dress and to think like one. You learn to love your furry loneliness and the boredom of keeping your ego afloat. You can't go back, you can only drift. Hereinafter called the artist, as it used to say in dusty old contracts. A ghost came up to me, and he didn't seem very pleased to see me there. He thought I would have gone by now. He asked me in his iciest tone, "Still here? Why haven't you gone?" His opinion of me wasn't good. In no way was I the sort of guy he'd be if he were flesh and blood. He wouldn't be sitting around like me, reading books and sometimes writing poems. But everybody's so nice. They seldom say you're a wastrel and a parasite. Hooligans by Lillian Necakov. Hope I said that right. Maybe it's Necakov. I do not know. Here's a poem from Hooligans called Shipwrecked. And it's dedicated for Jim. I wonder which Jim that could be. Below the equator, a man named Nicanor Para sleeps under a blazing meteor. I fear his shoes might be full of meaning. He was once younger than I am now. His enzymes curing and reshaping the disease of language until he was able to utter the nuances of the universe like a caged bird dreaming of flight. Across the pond I hear the geese, remembering Chilean nights, flecked with merkin and fractals, nights set on fire by the audacity of numbers and the hand of a poet waving a spirit across the boulevards of summer. You step into the ocean in search of a house with broken windows, spilling laughter-filled stones into the meandering streets, until the wind, like an ugly dog, threatens your escape, and you are shipwrecked somewhere between snow and imagination. We've been enjoying the amusing tales, poetically rendered, of James Tate these last few poetry shows. And we shall return in fact, to the Return to the City of White Donkeys book. And a rather appropriate poem for these late summer afternoons where many of you will be at the cottage enjoying either the stillness or the noise of powerboats whipping up and down the lake. The all but perfect evening on the lake. We were at the lake for the weekend. We had just come back from canoeing. We had seen the loons and a couple of deer and an eagle. Cleo was taking a shower and I had just opened a bottle of wine. There was a fire going in the fireplace. I had worked hard for all of this, but still I felt the luckiest man on earth. When Cleo finally joined me, I knew it was true. She was stunning. "It was a great day, honey," she said. "Thank you. You're what makes it great for me, and I can't thank you enough," I said. I poured us some wine and we stared at the fire. About an hour later, there was a knock at the door. This in itself was a little disconcerting, because there are so few people around here. I looked at Cleo and she shrugged her shoulders and grimaced. I opened the door and there was a ranger standing there. "Are you Eric and Cleo Martin?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "What seems to be the problem?" "You're under arrest," he said. "What in the world for?" I asked, utterly confused. "Too much happiness," he said. "The folks around here have registered several complaints, and there are laws that limit this kind of thing on the lake. You'll both have to come with me." "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked. "I'll have to look in my book," he said. And then he pulled a thick leather book out of his coat and carefully turned the pages until he found the appropriate entry. He studied it for a minute or so, running his finger down the page. Finally he said, "Yes, definitely. This is some kind of joke, but I am unable to determine which kind." "Is that okay? Would that bother you if I can't tell you what kind of joke it is?" I looked at Cleo. "We don't care." "Well, good night, officer. Have a good evening." "And you folks go right on back to being happy," he said. "Good night." Indeed, good night. Good evening, good night, and all that interesting stuff. Well, you don't know, don't be afraid. Just listen to me. Take what I say. Don't move your head.